Welcome to the 20th session of the KIPS Distance Learning Program Current Affairs Newspaper Roundup session. I am your host Shahrukh Haider, and the topic for today is civil service reforms. Now we're going to see what kind of civil service reforms are needed in Pakistan, what kind of civil service reforms are being proposed by the current Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf-led government, and whether they will be successful in reshaping Pakistan's bureaucracy and civil service or not, and what kind of benefits can we draw from these civil service reforms. So first of all, what is the civil service of Pakistan? So the civil service of Pakistan is, as it was known during the British era, the steel frame of the government. It is the executive branch of the government defined under the Constitution and under the 1973 Civil Servants Act, which defines the civil service of Pakistan as the executive branch responsible for the implementation of legislation that is created by the legislative branch of government, which is the Cabinet and the National Assembly. Now they also have the responsibility of ensuring service delivery, public services, and providing good governance to people and redressing their grievances. So that is what the civil service of Pakistan essentially is. So when we talk about the civil service, we need to see that the Pakistan civil service has failed to a large extent. There are a lot of problems with the civil service, and those problems are of a very deep and entrenched nature. So let's have a look at those problems. First of all, there is a lack of good governance and service delivery almost all across the board in Pakistan as far as the civil service of Pakistan is concerned. The civil servants are unable to deliver the services that they have been given the mandate to deliver, which is why there is a lack of good service delivery. There is a lack of public services all around the country, which translates into the public being left on its own to take care of themselves in the education sector, in the health sector, in the public work sector, and all other social services that are the responsibility of the government to provide, and the civil service to ensure that it happens. Secondly, there is a severe lack of transparency and accountability when it comes to the civil service of Pakistan. Now, accountability and transparency are two important facets of any functioning institution. Transparency means that whatever is happening within that institution, within that body, is made a public knowledge, and everybody knows, and there is no hidden agenda, and there are no hidden motives or any kind of activities that are not revealed to the public. Accountability means that every officer is held responsible for all the actions and all the consequences that he or she undertakes. And if there is any kind of discrepancy or any break in the rules of business that the bureaucrat or the civil servant was required to follow, then that civil servant will face the consequences of that by the legal procedure. Thirdly, there is not really any objective performance measurement mechanism within the civil service of Pakistan. This is especially true from the 17 and above cadre officers, which means that we don't really know and we can't really judge whether a civil service within his or her purview is performing well or not, which means that there is no criteria and there is no concept of having a performance-based reward system for civil servants, where if they if they perform well, they are rewarded well by the government, and if they are underperforming, they are penalized for it. There is no such system that exists in Pakistan. Fourthly, there is gross and overwhelming political intervention when it comes to the civil service of Pakistan. This is especially true for the higher cadre officers, the 17 grade and above officers who are recruited to the civil service of Pakistan through the Central Superior Services Examination, the CSS that is, and the PMS in some cases. So especially, for example, the higher posts in each province, the 22 grade posts such as the Chief Secretary, for example, or the Principal Secretary to the Prime Minister, or the Cabinet Secretary, all of these are highly politicized posts, and they only go to those bureaucrats and civil servants who are in some way in the good books of the present government. And the moment that that government changes, a new political party comes in, that bureaucrat is thrown out of the corridors of power, and another pro status quo government is installed in his or her place. Fifthly, there is no incentive to perform for the bureaucrats either, which means that if a bureaucrat wants to perform well ensure service delivery, ensure good governance within his or her district or purview or whichever responsibility he or she has, he will not get any benefit of it. There is not really any motivation to do it. Only those civil servants will perform well who are doing it out of the goodness of their heart, and that is to lose a criteria to ensure that there will be good governance and performance delivery by the bureaucrats. So we need a performance-based reward system. We need to incentivize the bureaucrats, the civil servants, to perform well. And lastly, there is no concept of specialization in the civil service. So let's say if we have a look at the 22 grade officers, for 6 months, for example, one DMG officer would be the Secretary of Health. In the next 6 months, he would be the Secretary of Petroleum. In the next 6 months, he would be the Secretary of Agriculture. And he doesn't really have any expert knowledge of either of the three industries, which is where they really fail these industries, and thus we have the result of declining and decreasing growth of each of these industries. So we need to promote and foster specialization within the civil service, and that means that the clustering system that was introduced in India has proved to be very effective, and we need to introduce a similar system in Pakistan. I will explain what the clustering system is a little later. So what are the proposed civil service reforms that we need right now in Pakistan? Well, when it comes to civil service reforms, we've had a history of commissions made by each successive government ever since the 90s to try to come up with recommendations for creating civil service reforms. Very extensive and comprehensive work has been done in that regard, and every commission has produced a very extensive and comprehensive report of recommendations which, if implemented, would have completely overhauled the civil service and made it an efficient service. But why has that not happened in the past 30 years? Well, there's a very important fundamental reason for that. Most of the failures were not due to a lack of ideas or recommendations, but rather due to an inability to implement those reforms. And this inability sprang from the reluctance on part of the bureaucracy to accept the reforms itself. So there is an internal friction within the bureaucracy that does not allow any key essential civil service reforms to materialize. So the current advisor to Prime Minister on institutional reform and civil service reform is Dr. Ishrat Hussain Saab. Now he's a very competent and a very well accomplished individual, and he has chaired at least 3 other civil service reforms commissions and committees to come up with recommendations. He is an eminently qualified person to head the Civil Service Reforms Committee, and he has written extensively on the subject of civil service reforms as well. For example, his very famous book Governing the Ungovernable is also about improving the civil service of Pakistan to ensure service delivery and good governance. But the primary responsibility, as he himself mentions in his book, is that those recommendations are not owned by the bureaucracy itself, and without them being owned and implemented by the bureaucracy itself, there is no chance of them being implemented and having any far-reaching or too disruptive implications. Now, when talking about the federal bureaucracy, it can be divided into 2 categories: the lower cadre non-cadre officers from grade 1 to 16 and the higher cadre officers from grade 17 to grade 22. Now, people from grade 1 to 16 are mostly paid wages that are competitive with the market. So for example, if there is a gardener that works in grade 3 of the government, he will get a similar income that he would get in the private sector. And they are also provided guaranteed employment until the retirement age of 60. There is tremendous, and this is one of the biggest problems, that there is tremendous overemployment in these grades, with the government having more drivers, gardeners and even telephone operators than it needs. And it is important that realize that about only 1/3 of all these non-cadre officers are needed by the government. The rest 2/3 are not fulfilling their duties, and they are basically on a free ride, on a stipend. So our country and its economy would be much better off if these telephone operators, rather than sitting idly all day in the office, are employed as salesperson, for example, or computer programmers, by giving them the right amount of technical and vocational training. So in government they are essentially adding no value, so they need to be released. But the only realistic way to reduce the size of government is not through by laying off, because that would create too much of a backlash, and worker unions around the country would strike and the country would go into anarchic situation. So the only realistic way is to reduce the size of this non-cadre officery through retirement. Now, additionally, the problem with retirement as well is that the government's pension bill is already huge and it's ballooning every day, and it is set to increase exponentially in the coming years. There is more and more civil servants retire and enter the pension fund. For example, the total pension bill right now stands at more than half of the total salaries that the Federation distributes among the civil servants that are still serving. So it is the other group, the grade 17 to 22 officers, that require and that are considered the heart of the bureaucracy and that are the engine of the government and that require the most effective interventions as it is. So a few hundred of them, as you all know, are hired through the CSS exam to the grade 17 every year, and most of them go on to retire on grades 21 or 22 by the age of 60. Now these people have a security of tenure. They don't really specialize except in foreign service, for example, and are paid much less than their market value is, and the responsibilities that are entrusted to them are extensive. Their remunerations compared to the work that they are required to do is exponentially and very bad. Okay, so it is here that the quite naturally reforms are needed. It was quite rightly pointed out by Dr. Ishrat Hussain in his book Governing the Ungovernable that these people need to given, for example, better salary. So, in the National Commission Government Reforms, NCGR, that was created in 2006 by the then Musharraf regime and lasted in 2008, was headed by Ishrat Hussain Saab himself, and that is the most comprehensive committee that was ever created for civil service reforms, and its report came public in 2012. And we need to learn a lot from that report, because that contains how to ensure the implementation of those reforms as well. But it was never really, owned by any of the political governments that followed the Musharraf regime, because naturally he was a dictator and there was a tendency to discredit anything good or bad that was done during the Musharraf era. Anyhow, there are, in my mind, and experts say, 7 different proposed measures that are required at this point. So the first one is that the salaries of the civil servants must be increased to make them more market competitive. Now, higher salaries must be based on performance and responsibilities, not just an across the board increase. There are various reasons why higher salaries would be effective and would increase the civil service and improve its cadre from 17 to above. Now, this would mean that there would be less, number one, less incentive for corruption and bribery and embezzlement. Performance-based incentives, which means that if you are performing good, you will get more money, would encourage officers to perform even well and to pursue higher performance targets. So a competition might just even be created among the officers, among who would be the most efficient and honest officers, and encourage improvement in performance. And such a model must be based on a key performance indicators scenario that is created in a layered manner to improve the performance targets of all civil servants. Now, secondly, there is a need to hire at least 400 to 500 civil servants instead of 200 to 250 each year to the grade of 17 through the CSS exam. And this is because in order to improve the service delivery of the young officers, it is important to not grant them immediate job security and security from ending their service, and that can be ensured by not having job security up until the grade of 18 or 19, for example, and each year removing at least 50 of the officers who are not performing well from the grade 17 up to the grade 20. And that would be possible if we hire more at the CSS grade 17 level. However, after each bureaucrats reach grade 20, there should be security of tenure, and but once again there should not be automatic promotion on the cards, which means that promotion should be based on their performance delivery and their service delivery and the fact that they have delivered good governance. Now, number 3, there should be an increasing move to foster specialization within the civil service of Pakistan. Our elite bureaucrats are prepared to be well-rounded officers, generalists in every way, who can serve in multiple capacities, but they can't really be specialists, can't really add substantial value to any of their responsibilities because they lack the specialist knowledge and skills. But by doing this, by increasing specialization, we would increase and stretch people's capabilities. A bureaucrat of intelligence and integrity might serve in senior positions in the ministries of education, interior, petroleum and states and frontier regions. Now, one cannot be expected to acquire expertise in all these diverse areas, even if one is very competent and very hardworking, right? So it is important to follow the model of India, where at mid-level career, bureaucrats are put into different clusters. So there is a financial cluster, there is a agriculture cluster, there is a foreign policy cluster, in which once those bureaucrats enter those clusters, they can only be placed in their relevant in those relevant ministries and attached departments. So for example, a bureaucrat in the financial division, a financial cluster, could only be placed in financial and economic positions and not into agriculture or industries, for example. And another specialization could be in the form of a technical group, which could include ministries such as planning, power, petroleum, communication, and another could be welfare group. So there's many ways to go about it to create sort of a clustering system that ensures that specialization is fostered among the bureaucrats and they are not generalist without any specialist knowledge and skills. So, number 4, we need to induct outside industry professionals every year at grade 18 to grade 22. This would create competition and a sense of insecurity among the serving cadre officers who were recruited through the CSS process, and it would encourage them to perform better in their service and to ensure service delivery. On a 5th level, the retirement age must be raised from 60 to 65. Now, a bureaucrat who is fully groomed and has a lot of skills and abilities and knowledge at the age of 60 is at his or her prime of performance. They can add substantial and long impacting value to the government institutions, whereas instead of using all of that skills, they are simply retired. So the retirement age must be increased to 65. Now, on a 6th level, accountability is very important, but the model of National Accountability Bureau has quite frankly failed because it is a watchdog that pressurizes and puts a lot of pressure upon the bureaucracy, which makes them which cuts off their hands and decapacitates them from performing any service. Which means that transparency and accountability must absolutely not be based on victimization. The NAB model is pretty much a model of victimization and does not help weed out corruption. A better model can be taken from the General Accounting Office in the United States of America. Now, in America, the General Accounting Office, or the GAO, examines the performance of each program and department and of officers, and where it finds some wrongdoing, it reports to the FBI for criminal investigation. A similar process can also be evolved in Pakistan, one that is not seen as victimization but as true accountability. And 7th and the last recommendation is to try to completely end political intervention into the work of the bureaucrats from the elected officials, who basically push bureaucrats to comply by their directives by hanging the sword of transfer of posting upon their heads. Now, tenure protection in each department and in every deposition and the posting must be ensured, and relative departments should be decoupled from their line ministry so that the minister does not have undue influence over the bureaucrats of that department and can push them to do whatever he wants them to do and to forward his agenda. Now, these are the effective reforms that, if taken into consideration, would dramatically improve the service delivery and the performance of the civil service of Pakistan. However, it is important to realize that in these scenarios, one of the most important things is to ensure the implementation of these reforms, which is a very difficult thing to do because there is internal friction and internal opposition from the bureaucracy itself. Now, how do we ensure that the bureaucracy owns up to these initiatives and these reforms? Well, we include them in the entire consultation process, and we bring them on board, and we listen to their grievances, and we try to address them as much as we can. And where their grievances are irrational, we simply ignore them and push the reforms down their throats, I guess. So I hope that you understood this topic. The outline for this topic is in the lecture description. Make sure to see that. Thank you very much for your patience. Allah Hafiz until the next lecture. Take care and Ramzan Mubarak.